Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has announced the 23rd of August as the day for the country's elections. There is criticism, though, that the elections will take place before some key electoral reforms have been implemented. Elections in the country have traditionally been marred by violence targeting opposition party supporters. Joining us now is Piers Pigou, who is the head of Southern Africa program at the Institute for Security Studies. Piers, thank you for making time for us this afternoon. When you look at the current political landscape and the socio-economic challenges in Zimbabwe, how important are these elections going to be for that country?
Well, 5 years ago when the elections took place that followed the coup that ousted Robert Mugabe, there was a hope that the elections would provide a legitimizing platform for the winner to take forward a reform, re-engagement and recovery strategy. And that really withered on the vine post the 2018 elections. And we appear to be back at a kind of a deja vu at the moment, where there's fundamental disagreement over issues of reform, and there are fundamental differences over the extent to which the country is prepared for elections and the quality of the election management body, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and so forth, and a real concern now that in fact the elections in August will provide the basis for more contestation, polarization and disagreement, that we will be back into a similar pattern, a similar trajectory. That's the concern that we have at the moment.
And when you talk about these electoral reforms, what are some of the important ones that government was meant to implement?
Well, I think there are a number of reforms that were recommended by observer missions following the last elections, and the government says that it has conducted those reforms. I think there is contestation about that. Whether it's about issues of access to the voters' roll, for example, there's still no access to a electronically searchable and auditable voters' roll. So this lies at the heart of the integrity of the actual elections, and we've seen a large number of anomalies in the last few days when the election roll was being was put out for checking by individuals who'd have to go and see if they were where they were registered and so forth. And there's been a number of problems there. But of course we don't know the extent of those problems, the extent to which anomalies reflect systemic problems, and that's the concern, because these voters' roll has been really kept from the public for over a decade in many respects, and this really is an unusual practice, but undermines the legitimacy of the Electoral Commission and the process in itself. There are issues around the failure to move on a diaspora vote. The courts have ruled on that, saying that if you're a member of the diaspora, you actually have to go back and vote in Zimbabwe. You're not allowed to vote outside of the country. I think those issues remain contested. The recent delimitation report also contested terrain. So there's lots of technical contestation. Yeah. And we've seen also huge numbers of people not being able to get into the voter registration process, particularly young people.
Is it a make or break for ZANU-PF, or are they sitting comfortably ahead of August?
Yeah, I think there's a general sense from a number of commentators that ZANU-PF is going to win this election. That doesn't mean that it necessarily represents the majority of people. Fitch Solutions, the global ratings agency, put out a report last week in which it said that yes, ZANU would win through virtue of its incumbency and what it called overarching resources. In effect, the opposition is completely outgunned on multiple fronts, and has even adopted an approach which is largely secretive, not exposing its hand about its candidates, about its structures and so forth. It's what its leader Nelson Chamisa calls strategic ambiguity. This has caused a great deal of consternation in some quarters, and a real concern that the opposition is simply going to be outgunned when it comes to preparing for these elections, especially when you see ZANU spending so much money on vehicles and various things to help its election campaign. So yes, in a context where there will be free and fair elections, an even electoral playing field, we might see something different. And in the past, we've seen the opposition make great strides when there are these openings.
Yeah.
We're unlikely to see that, I think, in this election.
And what about the fears of unrest and violence ahead of the elections? I mean, people died in the previous elections.
Well, if you recall, in the run-up to the 2018 elections, it was relatively peaceful. There was intimidation. What happened was just after the elections where there were these shootings in Harare, which remain unresolved. I think there's a general sense, Clement, that ZANU-PF learned from the 2008 elections that it cannot employ too much violence. Let me put it that way, that this attracts unwarranted attention, and also that it doesn't need to overtly use violence, that it is able to use the pall of fear that continues to permeate across the country, what the former finance minister Tendai Biti calls the harvest of fear, where potential threats lead to a certain level of compliance. Now, we saw last year when there was a mass grouping of by-elections in March last year that there was threats of violence and violence around that election campaign. So there's likely to be tensions. I think and we're likely to see incidents of violence, but a systemic, widespread campaign of violence seems unlikely. However, if the results are deeply contested, there are also concerns in some quarters that could also lead to unrest, protest and repression.
Yeah. Piers Pigou, head of Southern Africa program at the Institute for Security Studies. Thanks for making time.